me a good description of the word mischief. What does that mean? Lori makes mischief. What's he making? Brian? He's making, problems. Kind of bad stuff. Exactly. So you're right. This one's kind of backwards. In this one, Lori causes some trouble, but Joe makes peace. Let's see what happens. Joe's face was a study the next day, for the secret rather weighed upon her, and she found it hard not to look mysterious and important. Meg observed it, but did not trouble herself to make inquiries, for she had learned that the best way to manage Joe was by the law of contraries. So she felt sure of being told everything if she didn't ask. Okay? So basically, Meg notices that Joe is acting funny. Okay? Joe's kind of keeping this secret about Mr. Brooke having feelings for Meg and having asked Marmee and their father about marrying her. And she's kind of keeping it secret, doesn't want to tell Meg. Meg notices that Joe is acting weird. She must know something. But with Joe, it's better to act like you don't care, because if you show that you really want to know what she's thinking, she'll never tell you. Does that make sense? If you act like you don't really care, she's more likely to tell you later on. Okay? So Meg is pretending like she doesn't notice that Joe is acting funny. Let's see. She was rather surprised, therefore, when the silence remained unbroken, and Joe assumed a patronizing air, which decidedly aggravated Meg, who in turn assumed an air of dignified reserve and devoted herself to her mother. Okay? So Joe is being super secretive. She's not giving away any hints, and Meg's kind of irritated about it. Okay, so she just turns and decides she's going to work very hard with her mom. This left Joe to her own devices, for Mrs. March had taken her place as nurse, and bade her to rest, exercise, and amuse herself after her long confinement. Basically, Mrs. March said, "Look, Joe, I'll take care of Beth. You've worked with her long enough. You go have some fun." Amy being gone, Lori was her only refuge, and as much as she enjoyed his society, she rather dreaded him just then, for he was an incorrigible tease, and she feared he would coax the secret from her. Normally, she likes hanging out with Lori, but right now, he's an incorrigible tease, meaning he keeps picking on her so much so that she can't stand it any longer. She can't put up with it anymore. He's picking on her, saying, "Joe, what do you know? Tell me your secret. What's going on? Why are you acting so weird? What's acting? What's going on? Why are you acting so funny? What's bothering you? Come on, Joe, why won't you just tell me?" He will not leave her alone about it. Okay? So she would rather just not hang out with him, because she's afraid that he's going to eventually convince her to tell the secret, and she's not supposed to.
Yeah.
No, because Amy was gone, Lori was Joe's only confinement. Okay? And Joe was quite right, for the mischief-loving lad, meaning Lori, had no sooner suspected a mystery than he had set himself to find it out. He wheedled and bribed and threatened and scolded her, and then he tried to pretend he didn't care to know, which was often the best way to get Joe to reveal her secret. At last, Lori determined that the secret concerned Meg and Mr. Brooke, and he set his wits to working to devise some kind of proper revenge for not being taken into his friend's confidence. So he knows it's about Mr. Brooke and Meg, but he doesn't know what it is, and he's upset that Joe won't tell him. Meg, meanwhile, was absorbed in preparations for her father's return. But all of a sudden, a weird change seemed to come over her, and for a day or two she was quite unlike herself. She blushed when looked at, she was very quiet, and sat over her sewing with a timid, troubled look on her face. So something made her really shy, all of a sudden. Like she was bothered by something had happened. Ugh, she feels it in the air. Love, I mean. She's got most of the symptoms. She's twittery and cross. She doesn't eat. She lies there awake and mopes around in the corners. One time she even said John as you do, and then turned as red as a poppy. "Whatever shall we do?" said Joe, looking for any measures, however violent. "We can't do anything but wait." Let her alone, and Father's coming home will settle everything, replied her mother. Here's a note for you, Meg, all sealed up. How odd. Teddy never seals mine, said Joe the next day, as she distributed the contents of the little post office. Who does Joe think the letter is from? Brian? Wait, it's sealed up? Well, we think it is, but Joe says, here's your letter. That's weird. Lori never seals my letters. Oh well, here. No, she really thinks the letter is from Lori. It's just weird because it's in an envelope all sealed up. She's like, he never seals mine. Why doesn't he seal all of them? This is weird. But she doesn't think much of it and just gives it to her. Okay? But we might think it's from Mr. Brooks. Mrs. March and Joe were deep in their own affairs when a sound from Meg made them look up to see her staring at her note with a frightened face. So kind of like she was reading the letter and then she went, oh! And like doesn't forgets that she made that sound out loud. Okay? My child, what is it? Cried her mother, running to her while Joe tried to take this paper which had done the mischief. Oh, Joe! How could you do that? And Meg hid her face in her hands, crying as if her heart was quite broken. Me? I've done nothing! What is she talking about? Cried Joe, bewildered. Meg's mild eyes kindled with anger as she pulled a crumpled note from her pocket and threw it at Joe, saying, You wrote it, and that bad boy helped you! How could you be so rude and so mean and cruel to both of us? Joe hardly heard her, for she and her mother were reading the note, which was written in a peculiar hand. What happened? You have to wait and see. My dearest Margaret, I can no longer restrain my passion, and I must know my fate before I return. I dare not tell your parents yet, but I think they would consent if they knew that we adore one another. Mr. Lawrence will help me get to some good place, and then, my sweet girl, you will make me happy. I implore you, I'm begging you, don't say anything to your family yet, but to send one word of hope through Lori to your devoted John. So, this is like an elaborate love note from Mr. Brooke to Meg. Okay? This is Joe. Oh, that little villain! He did it to pay me for keeping my word to Mother. Oh, I'll give him a hearty scolding and bring him over to beg pardon, cried Joe, burning with fury. But her mother held her back, saying, Stop, Joe. You must clear yourself first. You've played so many pranks that I'm afraid you have had a hand in this. Okay, how can they tell that this letter was not written by Mr. Brooks? How could they tell it was not written by Mr. Brooks? Caleb? It's not his handwriting. It's a peculiar handwriting. What else? What does the letter say that we know is false?
Oh,
Riley?
that don't tell your parents what he already told.
Exactly. Don't tell your parents. He had already told Mr. March and Mrs. March, right? When he was away helping Mrs. March take care of their father at the war. Okay? So, they know that Mr. Brooke didn't write it, so someone is playing a prank on Meg. It wasn't Joe. Who does she think it is? Everyone? Lori. And now Joe is not happy. How dare he do something so rude? Okay? Because you'll see what happened next. On my word, Mother, I promise I haven't done anything. I don't know anything about it, as true as I live, said Joe, so earnestly that they believed her. If I had taken part in this, I would have done it better than this. I should think you'd have known Mr. Brooke wouldn't write such stuff as that, she added, scornfully tossing down the paper. It's kind of like his writing, faltered Meg, comparing it with the note in her hand. Oh, Meg, You didn't answer it, cried Mrs. March quickly. Yes, I did. And Meg hid her face again, overcome with shame. All right. At the end of this love note, it says, "Don't say anything to your family, but tell me how. Like, do you like me? Tell me if you like me. Send word to me through Lori."
Why would?
Okay. So, sweet little Meg wrote a note back to Mr. Brooke, thinking that he wrote this letter, which is a fake. Now, listen. Oh, Meg, you didn't answer it, did you? Cried Mrs. March quickly. Yes, I did. And Meg hid her face again, overcome with shame. Oh, this is far worse than I thought. Tell me the whole story, commanded Mrs. March, sitting down by Meg and holding on to Joe, lest she fly off after Lori. Well, all right, so listen to what happened. I received the first letter from Lori, who looked very innocent when he was delivering it, began Meg without looking up. I was worried at first, and I meant to tell you, Mom, Mother, Marmee, whatever. Then I remembered how you liked Mr. Brooke, so I thought you wouldn't mind if I just kept my little secret for a few days. Oh, forgive me, Mother. I've paid for my silliness now. I can never look at him in the face again. Okay, but what did you say to him? Said Mrs. March. Well, I only said that I was too young to do anything about it yet, that I didn't wish to have secrets from you, and that he must speak to Father. I was very grateful for his kindness, and I would be his friend, but nothing more, for a long while. Pretty good response, right? Very mature. She says, look, Mr. Brooke, I like you and everything, but I'm too young for this kind of talk. Okay? So she, bless her heart, really thought she was writing back to Mr. Brooke. But her response was a very mature response. Marmee was afraid she had said, oh, Mr. Brooke, I love you so much. I can't wait to marry you. Blah, 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 blah. That would have been highly inappropriate for a 17-year-old girl. Okay? But Meg was actually wrote back a very mature response. And Mrs. March is now extremely proud of her. Mrs. March smiled, as if well pleased, and Jo clapped her hands, exclaiming with a laugh, you are a model of prudence. What's prudence? The bottom of the page. Luke? Carefulness. Mm-hmm. Tell on, Meg. So what did he say to that? So, Lori wrote a prank note to Meg. Meg wrote back to Mr. Brooke. That letter got to the real Mr. Brooke, and now he wrote back.
Oh, no. Wait, that's Lori actually did.
Mm-hmm. Well, who knows? Maybe Mr. Brooke went and checked the mailbox. Maybe he checked the P.O. box. Who knows? But, hold on. Listen to what he says. Meg said, well, he writes in a different way entirely, telling me that he never sent any love letter at all, and is very sorry that my roguish sister, Jo, should take liberties with our names. It's very kind and respectful, but think how dreadful this is for me. She's like, he was really nice in his letter back, but I'm so embarrassed. Here I am talking to him about marriage, and he never even asked me about marriage. Okay? She's like completely embarrassed. Who does Mr. Brooke think caused the problem? Jo. I'm so sorry that your sister Jo would be so irresponsible as to pretend to write in our names, but I never wrote that letter at all. But now Jo is like, whoa, this was not me. Meg leaned against her mother, looking the image of despair, and Jo tramped about the room, calling Lori names. All of a sudden she stopped, examined the two notes, and said decidedly, you know what? I don't believe Brooke ever saw either of these letters. Teddy wrote both of them. You go and get Lori. I shall sift the matter to the bottom and put a stop to such pranks at once. Who said that? Marmee. Away ran Joe, and Mrs. March gently told Meg Mr. Brooks' real feelings. Now, dear, what are your own? Do you love him enough to wait till he can make a home for you? Or will you keep yourself quite free for the present? I've been so scared and worried, I don't want to have anything to do with lovers for a long while. Perhaps even never, answered Meg. If John doesn't know about any of this nonsense, don't tell him. And make Joe and Laurie hold their tongues. What does hold their tongue mean?
Stay quiet.
Oscar? Stay quiet, exactly. I won't be deceived and made a fool of. It really is a shame. Seeing Meg's usually nice, gentle temper was roused and her pride hurt by this mischievous joke, Mrs. March soothed her by promises of entire silence and great discretion for the future. What is discretion? Matthew?
Discretion, noun. Restraint or judgment, especially in handling a secret or delicate matter.
Very good. Laurie's steps were heard in the hall. Meg fled into the study, and Mrs. March received the culprit alone. I can kind of see Laurie walking in like this. Kind of like when your mom calls you and you're like, oh boy, here it goes. Exactly. Joe had not told him why he was wanted, fearing that he wouldn't come, but he knew the minute he saw Mrs. March's face, and stood twirling his hat with a guilty air. Joe was dismissed. She said, Joe, you can leave us, but stood in the hall like a sentinel, for fear that the prisoner might bolt. The sound of voices in the parlor rose and fell for half an hour, but what happened during that interview, the girls never knew. When they were called in, Laurie was standing by their mother with such a penitent face, like he'd just been spanked. Not literally, but like how he felt like he had just been spanked. You know what I'm talking about? How he just felt really sorry, like, I know I messed up. With such a penitent face that Joe forgave him on the spot, but did not think it wise to betray the fact. Meg received his humble apology, and was much comforted by the assurance that Mr. Brooke knew nothing of the joke. I'll never tell him until my dying day, and wild horses shan't drag it out of me. So, just so you'll forgive me, Meg, and I'll do anything to show you how sorry I am, he added, looking very much ashamed of himself. Well, I'll try, but it was a very, Jacob shush, but it was a very ungentlemanly thing to do. I didn't think you could be so sly and malicious, Laurie, replied Meg, showing her disapproval. You're right, it was altogether abominable. But you will forgive me, though, won't you? And Laurie folded his hands together with such a pleading look that it was impossible to frown on him in spite of his scandalous behavior. Meg pardoned him, and Mrs. March's grave face relaxed, in spite of her efforts to keep sober. Meanwhile, Joe stood aloof, kind of like, I'm never going to forgive you. Trying to harden her heart against him, priming up her face into an expression of disapproval. Okay? So here you have like Meg and Joe, right? Meg's over here, Lori, I forgive you. It was very ungentlemanly, but I'll forgive you. And you have Joe over here like, I ain't never forgiven you. And she's the one that was offended by the prank. Laurie looked at her once or twice, but as she showed no sign of relenting, he made her a low bow and walked off without a word. As soon as he had left, Joe wished she had been more forgiving, and when Meg and her mother went upstairs, she felt lonely and longed for Teddy. After resisting for some time, she finally yielded to the impulse, and armed with a book to return, went over to the big house. Yes, is Mr. Lawrence in? Asked Joe of a housemaid who was coming downstairs. Meaning Laurie. Yes, miss, but I don't believe he's seeable just yet. Meaning, I don't think he wants to see anyone just yet. Why not? Is he ill? No, miss, but he's had a scene with Mr. Lorry, who is in one of his tantrums about something which vexes the old gentleman. Oh, sorry. She was asking for Mr. Lawrence, like the old Mr. Lawrence. Okay? And she's like, yes, ma'am, he's here, but I don't think he wants to be seen just yet. Well, why not? Well, he just had a big old fight with Lori, who was in one of his tantrums about something, which vexes the old gentleman. So Lori came home, and Mr. Lawrence and Lori got into a fight, probably about what Lori had done. Okay, not literally a fight, but like a verbal fight. Yes, an argument. Well, where is Lori? Oh, he's shut up in his room, and he won't answer, although I've been a tapping. I don't know what's supposed to become of this dinner, for it's ready and there's no one here to eat it. I'll go and see what the matter is. I'm not afraid of either one of them. Up went Joe and knocked smartly on the door of Lori's little study. Stop that, or I'll open up that door and make you, called out the young gentleman in a threatening tone. Joe immediately knocked again. The door flew open, and in she bounced before Lori could recover from his surprise. Why is he surprised? Who does he think is knocking at the door? Ryan? Either the maid or maybe even Mr. Lawrence. Seeing that he really was out of temper, Joe assumed a contrite expression, meaning genuinely sorry, and going dramatically down upon her knees, said meekly, please, forgive me for being so cross. I came over here to make it up, and I can't go away until I do. Oh, it's all right. Get up, and don't be a goose, Joe, was the cavalier reply to her petition. Thank you. I will. Could I ask what's the matter? You don't look exactly easy in your mind. She's kind of trying to make him laugh, make him feel a little better. Oh, I've been shaken by grandfather, and I won't bear it, growled Lori indignantly. Just because I wouldn't say what your mother wanted me for. I promised her I wouldn't tell, and of course I wasn't going to break my word. I'd have told my part of the scrape if I could without bringing Meg in, but as I couldn't, I held my tongue and bore the scolding till the old gentleman collared me. Then I bolted for fear that I should forget myself. Why was Mr. Lawrence upset with him? Because he wouldn't tell him what the problem was with Mrs. March. Why couldn't he tell him what the problem was? Well, because he had promised Meg he would keep silent. Okay? But his grandfather, he can't tell his grandfather that. So his grandfather thinks he's just hiding it from him, getting madder and madder and madder. Well, that wasn't very nice, but he is sorry. I know it. So go down and make up with him. I'll help you. Oh, hanged if I do! I was sorry about Meg, and I begged pardon like a man, but I won't do it again when I was not in the wrong. Yeah, but he didn't know that. Well, he ought to trust me and not act as if I was a baby. Oh my goodness, what pepper pots you are, sighed Joe. How do you mean to settle this affair? What does she mean by pepper pots? Jacob? Hot temper, very good. Well, he ought to be the one to beg pardon or apologize. And believe me when I say I can't tell him what the fuss is all about. Oh, bless you. He won't do that. Well, I'm not going down there until he does. Now, Teddy, be sensible. You can't stay here, so what's the use of being so melodramatic? Well, I don't intend to stay here long anyway. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll slip off and take a journey somewhere. And when Grandpa misses me, then he'll come around fast enough. Oh, I'll go to Washington and see Brooke. It's very gay there, and I'll enjoy myself after all these troubles. What does Lori threaten to do? Mr. Lawrence isn't going to apologize. He's like, well, fine, I'll show him. Jaime? He's like, very good. He's like, I'll run away. I'll make him feel bad, then he'll apologize. Oh, what fun you would have in Washington. I wish I could go too, said Joe, forgetting her part of mentor in lively visions of martial life at the Capitol. Remember, Joe is supposed to be helping him make up with his grandfather, and she kind of forgets that for a second, like, ooh, that would be fun. Wait, no, you can't do that. Well, come on in. Why not? You can go and surprise your father, and I'll stir up old Brooke. It would be a glorious joke. Let's do it, Joe. We'll leave a letter saying that we're all right and trot off at once. I've got enough money. It will do you good and no harm as you go to your father. For just a moment, Joe looked as if she would agree, for she was tired of care and confinement and longed for change, liberty, and fun. Her eyes kindled as they turned wistfully toward the window, but they fell on the old house opposite, and she shook her head with sorrowful decision. She says, listen, if I was a boy, then we'd run off together, and we'd have a capital time. But because I'm a miserable girl, I must be proper and stay at home. Don't tempt me, Teddy. That's a crazy plan. Yeah, but that's the fun of it, began Laurie, who was bent on having his own way. You bad boy, be quiet. Sit down and think of your own sins. You sit down and think of your own sins. Don't go making me add to mine. If I get your grandpa to apologize for the shaking, will you give up running away? Asked Joe seriously. Well, yeah, but you won't be able to do it, answered Laurie, who wished to make up, but felt that his outraged dignity must be appeased first. Oh, if I can manage the young one, then I can manage the old one, muttered Joe as she walked away, leaving Laurie bent over a railroad map. Men! And Mr. Lawrence's gruff voice sounded even gruffer than ever as Joe tapped at his door. It's only me, sir. Come to return a book, she said as she entered. You want any more? Asked the old gentleman, looking grim but trying not to show it. Yes, please. I liked this one so well that I think I'll try the second volume, returned Joe, hoping to soften him up by praising his recommendations. The shaggy eyebrows unbent just a little bit as he rolled the steps toward the proper shelf. Joe climbed up them, thinking of how she could possibly introduce the subject, but Mr. Lawrence seemed to suspect that something was brewing in her mind, for he faced around on her and said abruptly, What has that boy been about? Don't try to shield him. I know that Laurie's been in some mischief by the way he acted when he came home. I can't get a word out of him, and when I threatened to shake the truth out of him, he bolted upstairs and locked himself into his room. Well, he did something wrong, but we forgave him, and we all promised not to say a word to anyone, began Joe reluctantly. Oh, no, that won't do. He's not going to shelter himself behind some silly promise from you soft-hearted girls. If he's done anything amiss, he shall confess, beg pardon, and be punished. Out with it, Joe. I won't be kept in the dark. Okay, so what Mr. Lawrence wants here is actually a really noble thing. He wants Laurie to pay for whatever he's done. He's like, listen, you girls are really nice. I'm not going to let him hide behind this promise that everything's okay and that y'all promise not to say anything. If he messed up, I'm not going to have him hurting you girls. I'm going to make him pay for what he did. So Mr. Lawrence's heart is in the right place. He just doesn't know the reason why they can't tell him what happened. Okay? Mr. Lawrence looked so alarming and spoke so sharply that Joe would have gladly run away if she could. But she was perched aloft on the steps and couldn't get past him. Indeed, sir, I cannot tell you. Mother forbade it. Laurie has confessed, he asked pardon, and he's been punished quite enough. We don't keep silence to shield him, but we're trying to shield someone else, and it will make more trouble if you interfere. Please, just please don't. It was partly even my fault, but that's all right now. So let's just Let's forget it. Fine. You come down here and give me your word that this harum-scarum boy of mine hasn't done anything ungrateful or impertinent. Because if he has, I'll thrash him with my own hands. Like I'll spank him. The threat sounded awful, but did not alarm Joe, for she knew that this irascible old gentleman would never lift a finger against his own grandson. She obediently descended and made as light of the prank as she could without betraying Meg or forgetting the truth. Huh. Huh. Well, if the boy has held his tongue and not told me what happened because he promised, then I'll forgive him. He's a stubborn fellow, and he's kind of hard to manage, said Mr. Lawrence, smoothing the frown from his brow with an air of relief. Well, so am I. But a kind word will govern me when all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't, said Joe, trying to say a good word for her friend. You think I'm too hard on that boy. Well, you're right, girl. I love that boy, but he does try my patience past bearing, and I know how it will end if we go on so. He's like, I know I drive him crazy. I know I'm hard on him, but I'm hard on him because I love him. And Joe says, if you're too hard on him, he'll run away. Joe was sorry she said that the minute it was made, for Mr. Lawrence's ruddy face changed suddenly, and he sat down with a troubled glance at the picture of Laurie's father, who had also run away in his youth and married against the old man's will. Joe wished she had held her tongue. Why did Joe wish she hadn't said anything? Amy?
Because now he's thinking about his son Laurie's dad because he's been away.
Exactly. Well, he won't do it unless he's just very much worried, and he only threatens to do it sometimes when he gets tired of studying. I often think I'd like to run away, especially since my hair was cut. So if you ever miss us, just put an advertisement out for 2 boys and look among the ships bound for India. She cracked the joke. She laughed as she spoke, and Mr. Lawrence looked relieved, evidently taking the whole thing as a joke. You hussy, how dare you talk in that way? Where's your respect for me and your proper bringing up? He said, pinching her cheeks good-humoredly. Go and bring that boy down to his dinner, and tell him it's all right. Yeah, he won't come, sir. He feels pretty badly because you didn't believe him when he said that he couldn't tell. I think the shaking hurt his feelings very much. Joe tried to look pathetic, but must have failed, for Mr. Lawrence began to laugh, and she knew the day was won. Yeah, I'm sorry for that, and I ought to thank him for not shaking me, I suppose, said the old gentleman, looking a trifle ashamed. If I were you, I'd write him an apology, sir. A formal apology will make him see how foolish he is, and bring him down quite amiable. Try it. He likes fun, and this way is much better than talking. I'll carry it up to him. Mr. Lawrence gave her a sharp look and put on his spectacles, saying slowly, You're a sly puss. Here, get me a bit of paper, and let us have done with this nonsense. The note was written in the terms which one gentleman would use to another after offering some deep insult. Joe dropped a kiss on top of Mr. Lawrence's bald head and ran up to Laurie's room. She called to Laurie to be a good boy and slipped the note under the door. She was walking quietly away when the young gentleman slid down the banister and waited for her at the bottom, saying with his most virtuous expression, What a good fellow you are, Joe! I'm ever so sorry about my temper. Oh, just go and eat your dinner. You'll feel better after it, said Joe, feeling quite satisfied that all was well as she whisked out the front door. Everyone thought the matter ended and the little cloud blown over, but the mischief was done, for though others forgot it, Meg remembered. She dreamed dreams more than ever, and once, as Joe was rummaging her sister's desk for stamps, she found a bit of paper scribbled over with the words Mrs. John Brooke. She's practicing her married name. She'd grown, and Joe found it, of course. She groaned tragically and cast it into the fire, feeling that Lori's prank had hastened that evil day for her.